I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to this panel where we'll introduce DORA's new practical guide to implementing research assessment for research performing organizations. For those I've not connected with before, my name is Kelly Cobey. I'm a scientist at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, where I direct the Meta Research and Open Science program. And I'm also the co-chair of DORA. And so today is really exciting. It's the third and final of 3 launch events. We're super excited to hear from our panelists across the Americas about the status of how to implement responsible research assessment in our different environments. So today our goal is to leave here with both a better understanding of the issues around responsible research assessment in the Americas, and specifically how our new DORA guide could help take concrete actions in this environment. So in terms of the sort of plan for the day, I'm going to kick off and talk briefly about DORA and the guide itself. And then we're going to hand it over to our esteemed speakers and hear about the reflections of responsible research assessment in their settings, and also about if and how and when they think the guide would be useful to them. Before I jump in and introduce the speakers, just a couple housekeeping rules. So people are filing into the meeting, which is really positive to see. It is a Zoom meeting, so please keep your mics off unless you're intending to speak. We'd love folks who are willing, if you're able to turn on your video to maintain an engaging environment, we'd be happy with that. Throughout the session, if you have questions about the comments on what's being discussed, please feel free to enter them into the chat. We'll definitely open up after the panel for questions as well, so there'll be a chance to address those at that point. With me today, we're lucky to have, today and always, Giovanna Lima, our program manager at DORA. So a big thank you to Giovanna for all her work preparing for all the 3 launch events and for supporting us today. So if you have a specific question, you can direct it to Giovanna in the chat as well, especially if there's technical issues or something of that nature. And Giovanna will also help us later with the Q&A session. Okay, so I'm going to start off by introducing the other panelists before jumping into a bit of description of a high level of the guide itself and sort of DORA's mission. So with me here today, we have Stephanie Warner, who is a fellow Canadian like myself and a manager of the Knowledge to Impact team in research services at the University of Calgary in Alberta. The portfolio provides support for community-engaged research, knowledge mobilization, research, responsible research assessment, research impact, and open science. So quite a broad responsibility and portfolio that she leads there. Stephanie's been at UCalgary since 2014, transitioning initially from a postdoctoral role, then into a sessional instructor position, and then working in the research office. She has a PhD in experimental medicine from UBC. In addition to Stephanie, we have with us today Christian Gonzalez-Billaut, who is the VP for Research and Development at the University of Chile, where he's also a professor in the Department of Biology within the Faculty of Sciences, and he serves as in the Department of Neuroscience. Christian has over 20 years of experience in leading research projects and initiatives at the university, and has previously served as the president of the Society of Biology of Chile and the Chilean Society of Neuroscience. At the international level, he's a council member on the International Science Society for Neurochemistry, and he was recently connected to the international member of the American Society for Cell Biology. Further to all those things, he's also, we're lucky to have him as a steering committee and executive board member at DORA. And then finally, last but of course not least, we have with us Judith Sutz, who's a full professor of science, technology, and innovation development and academic coordinator of the University Research Council from the University of the Republic in Uruguay. She specializes in the study of problems of development and underdevelopment based on the interrelationships between science, technology, and society. She also conducts research on problems associated with the production and social use of knowledge, promoting interdisciplinarity in the fields of social science. Like Christian, Judith is also a member of the DORA Steering Committee. So we're really grateful to have had your contributions to the guide and for today's session. Okay, so a lot of interesting people to hear from. So I'm going to move quickly through my slides on DORA and about the framing for the guide. So before we begin the session, I wanted to start with a sort of ground setting on DORA. So DORA is both a statement of principles as well as an organization that campaigns for and supports reform for research evaluation practices. The declaration itself draws attention to problems of using journal-based metrics in hiring, promotion, and funding decisions, and emphasizes the need to recognize a broader range of scholarly contributions. I feel like a common misconception with DORA is that people think it basically just is about not using the impact factor. But in reality, DORA is a very nuanced set of 18 recommendations for distinct actors in the research ecosystem, including funders, institutions, publishers, metric suppliers, and researchers. Signing the declaration can be an important way for both individuals and organizations to publicly declare their commitment to improve research and researcher assessment. The declaration is currently signed by more than 26,000 individuals globally. So it means to me that there's a lot of folks interested in responsible research assessment. So when we think about responsible research assessment at DORA, we consider it an umbrella term for approaches to assessment which incentivize, reflect, and reward the plurality of characteristics of high-quality research in support of a diverse and inclusive research culture. At DORA, our mission is I think a demanding one. It's to advance practical and robust approaches to how research and researchers are assessed globally. And it's across all disciplines. So we're discipline agnostic in what we're doing. But of course, there are intense considerations within disciplines for effective implementation for responsible research assessment. And we work with a whole range of actors within the ecosystem to get responsible reform done. We're fortunate a couple of years ago to have received funding from the Arcadia Foundation. And through this funding, we launched Project TARA, Tools to Advance Research Assessment. And the TARA funding is part of what led us to create the implementation guide we're presenting today. And so the guide is, without further ado, hot off the presses and available for folks to download. So an enormous undertaking over the past year for our team and a team of co-developers, which I'll speak to in a minute. So hopefully you've had a chance to get your QR code scanned, but I'm sure Giovanna will pop it in the chat for those who haven't. So this guide, really, when we wanted to initiate this program, we wanted to address the question of how do we actually get started with research assessment reform? In my position as co-chair, I'm often approached by different organizations that have recognized the need for responsible research assessment, and they want to do something different than what they're currently doing. But there's this initial resistance or inertia in terms of they don't practically know how to move from where they are today to something better. And so this is a bit of a one-stop shop for research performing organizations to take them from recognition towards implementation. The guide itself has been co-created by a number of different individuals. So the DORA team, which I'll point to in a minute, but we actually held an in-person workshop in January of this year in Washington, where we had 35 attendees from different interest group holders present and providing feedback on the guide, trying to make it more relevant. One thing that is important about the guide in acknowledging the diversity of perspectives that went into it, we're very salient of the fact that this is not a prescriptive guide. This is not sort of a set of standard practices in any way. The guide is meant to be used in a sort of choose your own adventure fashion, wherein you can read each chapter independent of one another and use if and how it benefits you in your circumstance. The guide team was led internally by our DORA staff. I'd like to particularly highlight Liz Allen, who did a lot of the project coordination when this was kicking off the ground. And of course, Giovanna, as well as Flor Massa and Ruth Schmidt, who worked on some of the design and implementation of the guide. And of course, my fellow chairs, Ginny Barber and Rebecca Lawrence. So the guide itself, in terms of what it contains, is a set of 4 distinct chapters. As I mentioned, these can be read top to bottom or used if in parts how people find relevant. The first chapter is really about reminding ourselves about the principles of responsible research assessment, really very much the scene setting section. Then we move on to the second chapter, which I think is really the meat of the document, and it's 9 potential key activities for research performing organizations to engage in or consider engaging in as they move from where they are to developing, implementing, and monitoring a strategy for responsible research assessment. So again, it's not prescriptive. They don't have to be done in this order. They don't all have to be done at all, but these are some suggestions and reflections on how you may approach this in your setting. In chapter 3, we move on to 4 key moments in research assessment. and the types of interventions you could think about as an institution within each of these moments. So we have tables that are like a menu of options in this section that we have seen institutions implementing certain practices, and you could consider as an institution whether this is something relevant to you. And then finally, in Chapter 4, we highlight global initiatives beyond DORA that are related to responsible research assessment. So many of you will know that there are many parallel and integrated change trajectories in our institutions. So, I'm very involved in the open science space. There's also initiatives like community engagement, societal impact, and all of these trajectories can be influenced to or influenced by responsible research assessment. So this chapter sort of delves into some of the main players in this responsible research assessment space. And, there's this idea of sort of change fatigue. We're transforming behavior in many areas. And many can feel there's no time or resources to do all of these things. So we try to couch these together in a way that is a collective and moving them all forward. And I wanted to highlight as well, in addition to the chapters themselves, which are dotted with exemplars and resources that you can download, as part of this implementation guide, we're launching 3 new case series, or studies, I should say, from Japan, Denmark, and Calgary, Stephanie's institution, where we highlight within each of these settings in a sort of narrative way how they've implemented responsible research assessment and how that approach has or has not been effective. So a little bit of lessons learned from these settings. And I find these narrative case studies, which we have several of, and you can read the older ones as well, they can help sort of position institutions and individuals in leadership to understand changes and the pace of change that they might consider making in this space. Okay, so that was our whirlwind tour through responsible research assessment and the excitement of sharing our new practical guide with you. At this point, we're going to move to our panel. So I'm going to get my screen share off here. And just a big thank you again to our panelists for joining us. In our panel discussion, we've got these 3 experts in responsible research assessment. They've all been leading in their own jurisdiction efforts to reform research, and including as part of our steering committee at a global level. So I thought maybe we'd kick off the conversation with you, Judith, and maybe you could start by describing in your sort of setting what you think the main benefits of implementing responsible research assessment in Uruguay are.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Well, in a nutshell, the main benefits are: first, providing evidence that alternatives to the current research assessment system are being implemented in diverse research institutions around the globe. And second, suggesting key points to consider when implementing in-house changes. Why is it relevant for a country like Uruguay to provide evidence that building alternatives to the current research assessment system is, besides being necessary, feasible? We conducted a survey reaching the universe of Uruguayan researchers focusing on opinions around research evaluation, asking about agreement and disagreement with several formulations. We found 4 clear-cut, strong agreement, notwithstanding difference in gender, age, academic level, areas of knowledge and institution where one works. These agreements are that research and researchers' evaluation first, the way we are doing it first, encourage poor academic practices, salami papers, predatory journals, etc. Second, and this is very important, hinder engagement with non-academic stakeholders. 3 and 4, we need to change the system so we can redress these trends. Furthermore, more than 50% acknowledge that the evaluation processes generate stress, reaching 70% for female researchers. Change it would be beneficial for achieving a less stressful working environment. From this result, a positive attitude toward change in research assessment could be guessed. Nevertheless, when thinking on implementing changes, hesitations comes to the fore. Let's take the following formulation that we provide in the survey. Until proven alternatives are known that overcome negative aspects in the current evaluation criteria, I would prefer not to change. 66% disagree, which indicates a small majority disposition to change. However, the academic elite, those belonging to the highest level of the national system of researchers, agree with this formulation at a robust 65%, with 2 in 3 of the most influential academics so reluctant to consider changes unless they know proven alternatives to the current assessment system. The importance of the wide exemplification provided by DORA's guide is more than clear. One of the several reasons for the reluctance to change the academic reward system shown by elites is the fear that loosening its requirement, particularly those measured through quantitative indexes, will lessen research quality. Nothing better to dismiss this myth than the detailed description the guide provides of first-rate academic institutions adopting a different approach to research assessment. Besides providing living proof that high-profile research institutions in diverse, highly industrialized countries are implementing changes following responsible research assessment guidelines, DORA's guide highlights concrete steps to pursue changes successfully. It alerts of explicit and sometimes less explicit difficulties that arise in the way and legitimizes taking seriously into account diversity and inclusion, with special attention to those so frequently forgotten in their specificity, women and early career researchers. This is particularly important in Uruguay today, because we are organizing a broad interinstitutional group of research institutions to provide a common ground for research assessment. The goal is not uniformization, which would have been impossible, but agreement on some common guidelines that respect the principles of responsible research assessment. The guide says, we know, and I quote, "We know that one size does not fit all in the practice of research assessment. Each organization and jurisdiction faces its own set of complex challenges. The guide is intended to be used flexible and, where possible, be disciplinary and geographically agnostic." I love that word, agnostic, exactly. And we encourage organizations to use this guide in ways that work best for them and their context. We can use this argument, I just quote, for each institution in the interinstitutional group, leaving freedom to respond to institutional specificity, but protecting some common practices for a better life in academia and also a better science. And as a last remark, we in Uruguay face a challenge that the guide acknowledges, and I quote, "Organizations sit within a broader system and researchers are influenced by policies from their organization as well as those from their funders, collaborators, institutions, and national and regional requirements. 70% of Uruguayan researchers are assessed by the organization for which they work and by the national system of researchers. The latter has gained a strong voice in terms of prestige attribution, a fact that often leads to privileging its criteria at the cost of the duties that researchers have to fulfill in their organization. To overcome the conflicts and tensions that arise from this situation is urgent, and for that, reaching agreement around a set of common guidelines to assess research and researchers is necessary. We are working very hard on that. And DORA's guide could not have come at a better moment to support us. So, thanks.
Thank you so much, Judith. Really, really great to hear your reflections and appreciate your sort of compliments in the guide. There's definitely complex challenges everywhere, and sort of you've highlighted some of the key ones in Uruguay. One thing that really stood out for me was your comments around sort of workplace stress in academia. And I think this is something that is often, almost taboo to acknowledge. And I think it's really unfortunate. David Moore, who I see is on the call, shared an article with me yesterday about Peter Higgs, the sort of Higgs boson in physics. And in 2013, when he won the Nobel Prize in Science. He was quoted as saying, which I think really resonates with your comments that you've just made, that if he was in the current academic system, he doesn't think he'd ever have found the peace and quiet to create the discoveries that he did and that were so foundational for physics. And I think that sort of overwork and stress that's sort of commonplace, I think, in most academic environments is really problematic for giving researchers the time and space to be considered and thoughtful in how they approach their research. So thanks, Judith. Christian, I'm wondering if you wanted to chime in from your setting in Chile. What do you feel are some of the resources that would help in your setting to help push responsible research assessment forward?
Well, I think that Chile, just other countries, the rest of the world, it's navigating an era that it's kind of complex. And it is, how can we be sure that we are making the right decisions when we hire, when we promote, and when we fund researchers? So I think there is a need to reform research assessment. That's for sure. This effort need to be collective. So we need universities, funding agencies, researchers, publishers, private sector, all working together, the whole community. So my first idea is that the key activities that are included in the guidelines represent a very important reflection points to anyone, particularly Chile. So I would like to refer to some of the things that I think are going to be very useful. First, I think that we need to engage senior and established researchers, because this group, and just like Judith stated before, so can be more reluctant to change, and this is a very essential part of the task. This leadership should foster to the entire community to promote discussions among with researchers at different stages of the career. So we need to mix people from different spaces, different age, different disciplines that can construct a respectful discussion that allow to discuss these differences. A second approach is related with the fact that in addition to these champions of research, I would say that there is a second group that is going to be very benefited of the guideline, and it is the high responsibility academic positions at universities that are entitled to produce changes to status quo, right? I'm referring particularly to vice provost or vice president for research or research directors. This is a very approachable group to start this cultural change. The third component, and this is absolutely essential, is the funding agencies, because funding agencies need to redefine their assessment, particularly when allocating competitive research resources. And I think from my perspective, what follows, it's part of the probably more difficult things, but it might be very transformative. So whatever the changes that the funding agencies are going to implement, so these changes should be implemented using an escalated mechanism, going from a small to large adjustment, but in a continuous manner. Every change is going to trigger resistance. We know that in advance. So it seems very necessary that agencies develop their own capacity to evaluate the outcome for each one of the change that was introduced, and then deliver to the entire community what is different about responsible research assessment before and after. And the agencies should be particularly careful specifying the criteria, the evaluation criteria for the success of this implementation, very likely indicating what are going to be or what they think should be the proxies or indicators that will facilitate a longitudinal follow-up in this scale. So the final concept that I would like to mention in this first question is that the academic institutions themselves thoughtfully incorporate the concepts that are included in the guideline, in the hiring, in promotion, and the allocation of internal resources. Just in a small scale that a funding agency, but at university it's pretty much the same. And this is something that I like very much about this guideline, because different institutions are going to face different challenges. We are all different. But the guideline offer a flexible framework that can be adapted to improve each process internally. So I would say that in academics institution, it should be a priority task to train selection committees on unconscious bias, the biasing techniques, and enhance key areas like job posting, candidate screening, interviews, overall selection process. And in such a way, I'm fully convinced that institutions are going to create a more equitable and supportive environment for all the community.
Great. Thank you so much, Christian. I think a lot of what you said resonates with me. In particular, the comment about sort of, whatever the change you make, there'll be resistance, right? This is the nature of sort of behavior change and implementation science. And in addition, your comments on the criticalness of funding agencies or institutions when making change, evaluating the change that they're making, right? So I think we all agree that current system of incentives and rewards in academia is not working. But what we don't want to do is move from one system that's bad to another system that's ineffective or not meeting our needs, right? So that evaluation is so critical. We see good examples of this, for example, in Luxembourg, when they rolled out their narrative CV. Folks interested in this could look up the national funder there. They've done impeccable work over 3 years surveying those submitting narrative CVs and those evaluating them on panels to really refine and ensure that they're meeting the needs of the community. So really resonates with me the need to do that, and the need to do that not as an afterthought, right? This needs to be like from the inception of thinking about the change and change management. All right, Stephanie, I want to bring you into the discussion now. We're both based in Canada, and I think there's a bit of a groundswell right now in our country around responsible research assessment. So I'm wondering, from your perspective as someone, leading the work out of Calgary, who's very much sort of a leader nationally, what do you think are practical guidance that you could share from your experience for advocating for responsible research assessment in Canada?
Yeah, thank you. And I was taking notes as well when the other speakers were speaking, because I think there's a lot of commonality here and so many great points to build on. I think one of the most practical and easiest ways to start with advocacy is to connect with people and to have conversations. And that sounds really simplistic, but what you mentioned about there being a groundswell of support in Canada, there are organizations from coast to coast to coast that are having these discussions about what matters in scholarship, what matters in our society, and aligning what we're doing in research assessment with what we say we value institutionally or nationally, like policy-wise. But I think understanding the nuances of that and really feeling part of that community means reaching out and connecting and speaking openly about what's working and what's not working. Through things like this, for example, this webinar, but I would probably also give a shout out to like a Canadian community of practice that's emerging around responsible research assessment that Kelly's going to be leading. So I think those ideas of connecting at like a network level within networks that you exist in already and with other universities. So I know that there's many circles of these discussions happening, but I think that's actually a very important starting point, is to speak openly and non-competitively, right? Like very collaboratively about the challenges of implementing changes and the value of changing. Another piece I think is about kind of leveraging our strengths. I'm thinking more institutionally now, to have discussions internally and then to build upon strengths. But what are you already doing within your smaller system to be more holistic or inclusive or non-discriminatory about research. Many of our institutions in Canada have been building a lot of capacity in areas like equity, diversity, and inclusion and decolonization, because these are Canada-wide movements that are happening, and they're recognized kind of social changes that have a ton of momentum, and responsible research assessment fits really well within this space as well. So I think that's another piece as well, is finding out from within different disciplines, do they have really interesting methods that they're doing for assessing research that fits kind of outside of the disciplinary norm in that area? Or are there disciplines that are more, that have a different orientation to research assessment, and could maybe more traditional disciplines learn some of the practices from those spaces as well? And so I think that, yeah, I think those are kind of the biggest pieces here. And I'm just going to give a shout out. I know I recognize a lot of names in the participant list as well. I'm speaking from a University of Calgary perspective, and from my kind of role engaging in spaces like Research Impact Canada or within the Canadian Association of Research Administrators, where I know these conversations are happening. But I would also just encourage folks in the chat to share some of the ideas that they feel are working really well for advocacy in Canada, in the Canadian space. And I think one other piece that I would just mention when we're talking about connecting with other organizations, it's really important to have connections between sectors as well. So discussions within academia and academic institutions are fantastic, but also thinking of our governmental folks, our funders, public sector, or our not-for-profits, our industry partners, and having these broader discussions about what is valuable in the research ecosystem, because I do think that opens up a lot of room for discussions about what are we missing in our traditional research assessment practices.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's really some great thoughts shared. I think for me, I think one of the things you touched on, which relates to the guide as well, is like the need for institutions to kind of map what they're already doing. So you talked about it from like the disciplinary perspective. So within a discipline, how people are approaching things, and how it relates to responsible research assessment. I think this is so true. I think there's often this sort of misunderstanding that implementing responsible research assessment, or DORA, or these types of principles means that like publications are going away and that we're doing like something different. And this is just not the case, right? So publications are a major conduit for knowledge exchange and dissemination. So they still have value, and they always will have value. We're just not going to determine their value based on the journal they sit in. It's a critical appraisal of what's been done. But I think there's always been, and there continues to be, a growth of a whole other range of things that sort of the modern scientist engages in, right? And these things have been going on sort of unrewarded or not sufficiently rewarded for some time. And so this sort of mapping at an institution, which is one of the steps that we recommend, is really critical, because you can bring to light or bring to the fore practices that are already happening. So you're not even needing behavior change. You're just bringing those practices to the fore and maybe supporting them more, and acknowledging them for what they've done. Because I have you already, Stephanie, I wanted to know if you wanted to comment on the University of Calgary case study. So as part of this guide, a major initiative that you were involved in was, of course, the creation of sort of your case reflection of how things have gone at Calgary. So I'm wondering if you could share some examples of successes and maybe some challenges in terms of your own experience locally.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just again state that I'm with a team in research services. So we're in our vice president research portfolio. We're also working closely with folks on the academic side of things. So our university's implementation of DORA has really been a partnership between kind of the like academic assessment through the provost's office, which covers things like tenure and promotion and academic hiring, and the vice president research portfolio, which is really here to support and amplify good research and ensure that we are competitive and doing research in a good way. So I think that some of the things that were successful practices in Canada were having institutional buy-in from a leadership level to say, as an institution, we are signing the Declaration on Research Assessment. that, of course, wasn't the first step. That was several steps along many discussions about how we value impact, about how community-based research and engagement with our community and industry partners is very important to the way that we do work at the University of Calgary, that we recognize parallel paths for Indigenous scholarship and Indigenous research. So I think that, you know, the signing of DORA was a very good step for that, because it really coalesces us around these core recommendations for institutions that we could really dig into. Another key piece that I think was very impactful early on was that language around DORA recommendation was built into our academic staff criteria and processes handbook, which actually is the policy document that governs the individual faculty guidelines and really governs processes like hiring and tenure and promotion and merit and all these pieces. So language was added in about how we, you know, value various forms of outputs, that we, you know, assess research on its own merits, that we want to look at kind of diverse measures of quality and impact. So that paragraph was added in and then was added to in subsequent years. So there's kind of this policy space that really sets the tone for how academic assessment is done at the University of Calgary. Alongside that and related to that is that there is also equitable and inclusive hiring training that already takes place for hiring committees, and that for example, things like for our Canada research chairs, there's an EDI, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan that has been built out. So I think that there's been a number of kind of interlocking pieces that have been really successful practices. One other that I'll mention is that we sometimes will have units reach out to us and chat about responsible research assessment. And for our internal Killam postdoctoral fellowship, which is quite a prestigious fellowship program, they actually adapted the criteria and the process for applying for that to include a narrative CV and to be more open to the recommendations of DORA just this year. So they're kind of piloting this in internal funding practices as well. And then more broadly in Canada, I mean, there's a ton of stuff happening more broadly in Canada, but I won't go into that too much because I think you also asked about challenges. We have some really great things in policy, and in many places, those are being taken up into the practice of research assessment in really fantastic ways. But policy does not equal practice, and it does not equal uptake. So some of the challenges are about interpretation of the policy and trying to make that as clear as possible, and trying to develop enough kind of companion guidance and documents so that people know how to interpret what's written in the policy. Just because we write it into the policy and say we now assess different types of outputs doesn't mean that we all know how to do that or that we all value that equally. So there's still a lot of the change management and buy-in that is taking place on an ongoing basis, I would say, and trying to learn from good examples of that, but also learning from where it's not working so that we can help to design additional resources to kind of get us over that hump. But I would say that's a big challenge, is that the institution has signed on and we have committed in a big way, and change is happening, but it doesn't mean that it's completely taken up in all parts of the university yet.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. I think we're super grateful that you shared your sort of case study with us. I find I know I'm frequently pointing to Calgary in the Canadian context, because one thing that I think you've done extremely well is sort of sharing your journey and sharing your sort of strategic plan and sort of landmarks where you're at and where you'd like to go, and recognizing that, you know, it's not linear, right? There are things that change and need to be considered through a consultative process. So it's been great to hear that, and I'm sure will be a huge resource for folks on the call and beyond. Okay, so I want to go back to Judith and Christian, and both of you, I would say, in your local context and globally, have become sort of advocates for responsible research assessment. And so I'm wondering if you could comment, maybe we'll go to Judith first and then Christian, in terms of like how you came to that role and how you think others can become advocates in their local setting for responsible research assessment. And just to say, I also see a couple of DORA Steering Committee members, including Leslie Chen and Laura Ravelli, on the call. So if they want to sort of add to the chat any ideas, we'd appreciate their thoughts too. Go ahead, Judith. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, indeed.
There you
Thank
go.
Well, you know, when we work with researchers and from all different areas, when you work in a research council, and you see how different they value quality, how different they understand what is to do good science. You want to help them to do the best. And the research system we have in place clearly work against that. So you start feeling that people are unhappy doing what is their passion. And this is simply something that you cannot accept. You need to make people happy doing science. And for that, clearly, the research system is a problem. Of course, we are public Latin American countries. I put inside Latin America, not only South America, Mexico, and Central America, and we have a lot of things in common. We are public universities. We have co-governance with students. We are autonomous. We have extension as a mission since the early times of the 20th century. And in this sense, we are quite different from European and North American universities, incredibly different. But nevertheless, let me tell you that when I wrote DORA's guide, I have the feeling that the guide speaks to me, speak to us Latin Americans, as if those that made the guide were aware of our most inner difficulties, and that give us the idea that the academic enterprise is much more universal, that we can think, looking into the enormous difference we have. And this is the trick, the real trick of it. And this is why DORA is so important. But what is the big issue? And I think that Stephanie was saying that. The big issue is convincing diverse stakeholders that responsible research assessment is necessary, is valuable, and is feasible. Because let me tell you, in 2004, a group of basic researchers, young basic researchers in Uruguay before DORA, started denouncing the problems of research assessment. 2004, 20 years have passed, and we have made little steps forward, because the problem is not continue to say how terrible the system is. The issue is to transform it, not to revolutionize it, to transform it. And for that, we need to convince. And to convince, we need arguments. And this is when the guide enters, because it gives us excellent arguments and excellent examples to keep on talking to people, to talk to their fears, to talk to their anguishes, to tell them it's not so terrible. You are not going to be expelled from academia. If you, let's help us together. And one of the things we in Uruguay have been working a lot, and incredibly, I think we are got to an agreement, is that we need intertemporal research assessment. You can do in 5 years some things and do in 5 other years different things. And if they are different, it does not mean that they are one better than the other. You can publish here and you can build your research problem here, and you are going to publish less, obviously, but you need, and then it comes. How do you do it? Well, let's talk narrative CVs. Let's see how people are. This is one thing. And the other thing, we agree, and I hope 10 of June that we are going to settle the issue, we are going to be able to do it, is you cannot punish the kind of activities that takes time from researchers And if you don't reward them, they are not going to be done. And if they are not going to be done, all the research enterprises is collapsing. And these kind of things are mainly done by women.
Yeah.
And so this is how we need to go, talking with people, convincing them, asking them, why if all the commission that you are not taking into account go on strike? Let's say, look at your institute in a month. So these kind of things, and I think that we need to, you know, the level of violence of these kind of discussions is incredible. People get so upset when discussing research evaluation. We need to slow down. We need to just argue and give examples. And for us from the South, I know that this is a little bit problematic, but I am going to say it. Knowing that very renowned universities are doing something makes people listen. It's not just between us in the South. Okay? So it's a problem of prestige. And we need to take this prestige to our advance. Okay, so this is what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Judith. So many great points. And I think I'll definitely come back later to this sort of topic or concept of fear in responsible research assessment changing. But maybe first, Christian, to you, sort of your thoughts in terms of how you came to the responsible research assessment space and how others can advocate for change. And then we'll jump in and have Leslie share his view.
Yeah, so I would say that first or foremost, lead by example. So I think that anyone that is connected today here have room for conducting RRA. So if you are going to be on a hiring committee, explicitly de-emphasize bibliometric shortcuts and ask for some other things like the significance, the originality, the rigor of the work you are assessing. If you are invited to serve on a study sections or a panel for grant discussions, so try to foster that the applicants include statement of research significance or societal impact in those proposals, and encourage the use of narrative CVs, just like Judith mentioned before. We need to move out a little bit from using H-index, journal impact factor, all of these quantitative measures. So, and very importantly, so try to implement pilot initiatives because the change has to be steady. But with each successful pilot that you can demonstrate, so we're moving a little bit the barrier. So it might be also very important to revise the promotion and tenure guidelines within institutions. So if you are involved at some way in that, try to deliver the message that in addition to publications, so we need to evaluate open science, interdisciplinary work, mentorship, societal impact, and team science. Organize discussions. So if you have the possibility to organize a workshop that could be in person or it could be remote, so do that. Invite people from other environments just to hear what other people are thinking about the very same problem. Of course, you can people can contact DORA, but can contact Quara. There's other initiatives that are very useful for this. And I would like to refer to something that is kind of unique, at least in Chile, and it is that we have some grants here that are collective grants that are awarded for 10 years. And it's a big amount of money for Chilean standards, let me point out. And in each one of these grants that is going to last 10 years, I think offers a unique opportunity to piloting things. So I envision that it will be great that these spaces, which are absolutely academic spaces, could align their internal metrics that are used to evaluate productivity and impact, considering some aspects that are very critical for early career and female researchers. So we need to have assessment that include gender sensitive and qualitative metrics in this perform assessment. It's just like two things that I have to add. First one is that we need to educate on this. So I think that we should incorporate RRA training into PhD programs, into our own students. So if your graduate school do not do it, do it your own, with your PhD students, with the PhD students of your colleagues that you meet. And this should include some modules on responsible metrics, research integrity, and science communication, for example. And finally, I think that this is also very, very, very important to support the change. We need to share successful stories. Everybody is waiting to highlight individuals or institutions or departments that have implemented successfully research, responsible research assessment. So we need to show how this effort give rise to some product, and particularly I think the guide is it's very helpful in that way, because the case studies, the stories that are included in the guideline, I think are very helpful for that.
Thanks, Christian. So many great points. I think the idea of training sort of graduate students is so critical. There's so much training in graduate studies that I feel like isn't actually equipping researchers for sort of their careers in the future. So many grad students obviously go on to hold academic roles or support academic PIs. There's a comment and question from Eleanor Risco in the chat that talks about the stress and pressure young early career researchers and students put on themselves. And I think part of alleviating that could exactly be that training, and from the front end of their career, making them aware of sort of what responsible research assessment is and the time and space needed. I think we've got Leslie here to add another quick comment on this, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for any questions. So while Leslie's chatting, feel free to add a question in the Q&A.
Hi, I'm not adding anything new, just to amplify the points that have been made by all the panelists. And the last point made by Christian about the need to train young scholar graduate students. I was fortunate to be involved with a program at my school in University of Toronto the last couple of years. I shared a link in the chat there. It's a fairly new program on public impact fellowship for PhD students to think about and reflect on the different types of scholarships that they value and the kind of pathways they can take. So I took that opportunity to introduce different ways to share research impact and a narrative CV, for example. And most of those students have never heard of these kind of possibilities, because they were all being trained by their own professor who've gone through very traditional way of being told what is a success and what is excellence. So they were very pleased by and large to be exposed to these possibilities, and it's very liberating for these students to know that there are different pathways to achieving scholarly impact. Particularly, many of them do work with community in different parts of the world, right? So that's just one example and model. And we're hoping that program will be continually funded, but also expand more broadly to other disciplines and to different faculties. And on the issue of narrative CV, some of you may know, and certainly Stephanie may have mentioned, that there's the tri-agency in Canada is moving in that direction. And I shared a link there with the template from the tri-agency. And I have to confess, I only recently practicing narrative CV myself. I've been a traditional CV. And so this past year, I try to, use the template as a guide to tell my stories of my research and what it means to me and to the community. And I can tell you, Judith is happy making. It makes me happy to say, well, looking back, I actually have done things that are not just, how many pages being published, what journals, and what awards did I get or not get, and that kind of thing. So I echo with you that these kind of practices actually liberating, creative, and happy making. So this is all good in terms of particularly for young scholars. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leslie, and some great links shared. That's super helpful for us to look at the models others have set. All right, I'm looking at the chat. There's definitely a bunch of questions there. We won't have time for all of them, but I thought I might go to this one. So there's a question here, basically. Let me summarize it. It's from Eleanor Risco, and they comment that, colleagues from fundamental research are worried that a format more qualitative or a narrative CV might put them at a disadvantage when it comes to demonstrating the relevance and impact of knowledge advancement, especially when the societal impacts of their work may be quite distant. So I'm wondering if someone wants to sort of take that on in terms of addressing, within the Canadian context, for instance, it's the same narrative CV questions that are being asked across all the agencies. So anyone want to comment on that from the panel?
I could add a little bit of something on that.
Sure.
I'll just maybe start with there's kind of a growing movement in Canada, at least, around talking about not just quality, but impact of scholarship, and what does that mean, and what does societal impact mean? And of course, you can look at that distal societal impact as like social, cultural, economic, health, environmental, like these cultural impacts. Many of us take a pathway to impact approach. And not all research is directly engaged with the end user of the information who may benefit from it, I would say. So there are some forms of engaged scholarship that it may be easier to draw that line to a potential impact. There are fields as well that have academic impacts, that maybe their research is leading to a new academic direction. It may be unique in their field, and maybe then it has been taken up by perhaps people within their discipline, people outside of their discipline. So there are ways to show kind of impact in a scholarly realm. Sometimes it could be policy relevant, sometimes it's not. Sometimes your work may lead to kind of building capacity within your research realm. So I think there are lots of different ways that every academic can tell a story of what contributions they have made that are significant, and to whom. So it's not about painting everyone with the same brush and saying we all have to have the exact same kind of impact. The whole purpose of the narrative CV is to be able to bring some of those contextual pieces to the forefront and tell the story of who you are and what you have contributed.
Exactly.
Great response, Stephanie. And I just to add before I'll close out, I feel like this is so true, and links back to Judith's comment earlier. Like you can't be expected to do all the things all the time. So things kind of go in cycles and in waves, and so even within someone's research program that lends itself to knowledge mobilization more readily, like maybe in a clinical setting, you're not always doing knowledge mobilization, right? There's times when that's just not the focus of what you're doing. So the narrative CV, in my view, really puts the power back in the hands of the researcher for them to define, based on where they are in their research program, what is meaningful and what's had impact. Okay, I feel like we could go on for days, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we've just got a couple minutes left. So a big thank you to the panelists. Really appreciate sort of your conversations and learnings being shared with everyone here today. There's so many takeaways, and I don't have time to summarize them, so we'll have to do that in an email. But this is our final sort of official launch of the guide. But in terms of next steps, I just wanted to share that we're going to be creating additional spin-off materials, like one-pagers and an interactive website of the guide online. And so if you follow us on social media, on Blue Sky or LinkedIn, you'll be able to keep pace with that. I also just wanted to say that if you're sitting here today and you're thinking, oh, it would be great to have a more in-depth discussion of the guide at my local institution, please reach out to us. We're very keen to sort of be on the ground or virtually giving sessions about the guide specifically. Giovanna will pop the link in the chat. We also we have our next event just around the corner. So we're doing a panel on responsible research assessment in India on June 6th. So folks interested in that could also join us there. And then just a big thank you all for your time in attending today. I really appreciate sort of your attention to the topic and, you know, your own advocacy in each of your own domains with regards to responsible research assessment. So following the call, we'll send an email with the guide and resources that were shared today. And we will continue to stay in touch and hope that you continue to dialogue directly with us so that we can continue to create and co-develop resources that help move the community forward. So again, just a big thank you and really appreciate your presence here today and all the best. Take care.